Picture a funeral in Lima in 1994. Not a quiet affair. 60,000 people fill the streets to El Ángel Cemetery. They are mourning a singer named Lorenzo Palacios Quispe, a man who grew up singing on street corners for coins, born in a shantytown to a family that had walked out of the Andes with almost nothing. His biggest song was Soy Provinciano, I am from the provinces. Lima's streets, at his death, proved that tens of thousands of people felt he was singing directly about them. The music he played was called chicha. And it didn't come from Lima. It didn't come from the Andes either. It came from Colombia, and then from the Amazon, and then from the surf music of California. It ran through electric guitars and wah-wah pedals and a scale so old it predates the Spanish conquest. How does a sound that nobody planned, nobody funded, and nobody wanted become the music of a generation? To answer that, you have to start not with the music, but with the city, and what happened to it in 40 years. To understand why chicha emerged when and where it did, you have to see what Lima was in 1940, and what it became in 40 years. In 1940, Lima held roughly 600,000 people. By 1960, it held 1.9 million. By 1980, 4.8 million. That is an eightfold increase driven almost entirely by migration. Black, indigenous, and mestizo campesinos leaving Peru's highlands and valleys for work, education, and survival. Lima could not absorb them fast enough. So the migrants built their own communities on barren hillsides and riverbanks at the city's edges. These settlements were called Pueblos jóvenes, young towns, a term the government chose to replace the harsher word barriadas, because calling them shanty towns was politically inconvenient when millions of your citizens were living in them. By 1974, those young towns held more than 1 million people. The political context made everything more volatile. In 1968, General Juan Velasco Alvarado launched the second-largest agrarian land reform in Latin American history after Cuba, expropriated 15,000 properties totaling 9 million hectares, meant to redistribute land to rural communities. In practice, the reform dismantled the old rural economy without replacing it. The haciendas broke up. The cooperatives often failed. Hundreds of thousands of families found themselves without stable livelihoods. They moved to Lima. Velasco's reform, designed to redistribute land to rural communities, accelerated the very migration it was meant to slow. In 1975, the same government enacted a law making Quechua an official language of Peru equal to Spanish. The law was never enforced, and it ceased to be valid when the 1979 Constitution became effective. The migration brought everything with it: the Quechua language, the rhythms of the highlands, the musical traditions of communities whose roots traced back to the Inca Empire. These were not preserved artifacts. They were what people hummed while building their homes on the hillsides above Lima. That music was about to collide with something very strange. The music the migrants brought with them had a name: huayno. It is the oldest continuous popular music tradition in the Andes, rooted in pre-Colombian music from the era of the Inca Empire. Huayno uses a distinctive rhythm, the first beat stressed, followed by 2 short beats, high, often piercing vocals. The instruments vary by region: quena flute, harp, charango, violin, saxophone, but the pentatonic scale holds constant. When migrants arrived in Lima, they did not leave huayno behind. They played it at festivals, sang it in the Pueblos jóvenes, but they were also hearing something new. In the 1960s, Colombian cumbia was spreading through South America, a loose, hypnotic 2-beat rhythm that felt both familiar and foreign to Andean ears. Here is the crucial detail. By the 1970s, cumbia was disappearing in Colombia itself. Salsa had taken over the dance halls of Colombia. While Colombia was moving on, Peruvian migrants were discovering the genre with entirely different ears. At exactly the same moment, rock music, surf rock, psychedelic rock, the sounds of California, was flooding global markets. Young musicians in Lima's working-class neighborhoods heard those sounds, picked up electric guitars, and began asking, "What happens if you run all of this through the scale we already know?" A band from the Central Highlands of Junín answered first. Los Demonios del Mantaro recorded the first chicha hit, La Chichera, the chicha seller. Then a Lima guitarist named Enrique Delgado Montes formed Los Destellos in 1966. He removed the horns and accordion of Colombian cumbia and replaced them with electric guitars playing simultaneous melodies, wiring huayno's multi-voice ensemble structure into a rock instrument setup. The upstroke rhythm came from the Peruvian coastal waltz. The wah-wah pedals came from psychedelic rock. The pentatonic scale came from the Andes. When Los Destellos released Elsa in 1970, it sold over 1 million copies. El Comercio would later call them the fathers of Peruvian cumbia. Then came the jungle. In Pucallpa, an oil boom city in the Peruvian Amazon, Juaneco y su combo was building cumbia amazonica, incorporating Amazonian rhythms and the farfisa electronic organ, performing in headgear made from parrot feathers. In 1977, 5 of the band's members died in a single plane crash. The sound survived them. Los Mirlos, originally from Moyobamba in the Peruvian jungle, moved to Lima in 1972. Their tremolo-drenched guitars brought the sounds of river and canopy into the same rooms where Andean huayno and Colombian cumbia and Californian surf rock were already mixing. Most chicha lyrics are about love. Nearly all reveal, beneath the surface, the Amerindian experience: displacement, hardship, loneliness, survival in an economy the police threatened and the government ignored. The music was a diary of the Pueblos jóvenes. It needed a voice. It found one. Lorenzo Palacios Quispe was born in 1950 in one of Lima's barriadas. His family came from Ayacucho, one of the poorest departments of Peru. He grew up on the urban hill of San Cosme in the La Victoria district. He and his brother sang on Lima's streets for money as children. His first public appearances were at age 15. He would name his band La Nueva Crema, after the British rock band Cream. He would be known as El Faraón de la Chicha, the Pharaoh of Chicha. His biggest hit, Soy Provinciano, I Am from the Provinces, became a rallying song for Lima's migrant millions. In a city that viewed Andean migrants through a racist lens, he turned an identity marker into a declaration. So why Lima, and not Buenos Aires, or Bogotá, or Santiago? The answer is collision and compression. Lima sits at the Pacific edge of South America, between the Andes and the ocean. Lima alone was the convergence point of 3 distinct musical worlds: the Andean highlands, the Amazon basin, and the Pacific coast. Compressed into a single city, physically incapable of slowing the influx. Because Lima's formal economy could not absorb the migrants, they built a parallel informal one: street vendors, self-produced recordings, local radio, outdoor dance events where the music found its audience. Chicha was born in that same informal economy. The cultural establishment's response tells you exactly where the power lines ran. Here is the receipt. The chicha aesthetic was, in the words documented in the historical record, viewed through a racist lens as huachafa, tacky, and inferior. Not stylistically different. Inferior. A social judgment, not an aesthetic one. Those fluorescent colors against black, the sinuous psychedelic typography. They drew from the Huanca nation's traditional garment colors, a palette rooted in Andean culture. Yet the establishment dismissed them the same way. The geography made the collision inevitable. The informal economy gave it a venue. The establishment's rejection gave it a cause. What no one predicted was what would happen when that sound, despised at home, finally crossed the ocean. In 2005, a French musician named Olivier Conen traveled to Peru and heard chicha for the first time. He returned to Brooklyn and founded Chicha Libre. Barbas Records released the first Roots of Chicha compilation, original 1970s recordings, in 2007, and a second in 2010. Their debut album, Sonido Amazónico, came out in 2008 on Barbas. Those recordings reached stores and critics in cities that had never covered Peru. The music Lima's establishment had called huachafa was now described as a masterpiece of psychedelic fusion. The mechanism of chicha's global revival was structurally identical to its original creation. Independent labels, word of mouth, musicians working outside official channels. In Peru, a generational shift was underway. By the 2010s, children of the migrants who built the Pueblos jóvenes had entered the middle class, reclaiming chicha not as nostalgia, but as identity. Chicha art followed the same arc. Poster artists like Elliot Tupac gained international recognition. In 2015, the poster artist Monkey appeared at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in Washington, D.C. Los Mirlos completed their first major tour of Mexico in 2017, decades after their recordings had been popular there on the Disco's Intergas label, without the band ever having traveled there. A documentary, Mirlos Dance, premiered at the 26th Lima Film Festival in 2022. Bands inspired by the original recordings emerged in Austin, Texas and Tucson, Arizona. Today, Quechua speakers make up 16.8% of Lima's population, a measure of how deeply the Andean migration remade the city that once had no official place for them. That number is the final proof. The people the establishment called tacky didn't disappear. They became the city. And what that city became in the years before the world took notice is where the story ends. By the mid-1980s, chicha had become the most widespread urban music in Peru. Los Chapis charted with El Aguajal, the swamp, a huayno rebuilt for the chicha stage, in rainbow-colored costumes. The swamp, where things from different worlds mix and survive. Chicha followed Peruvian immigrants to Chile through the same informal network that built it. Fluorescent concert posters became protest murals. Femicide, defense of the Peruvian jungle, LGBT rights. A visual language born from condescension became civic demand. Lima's 2023 population reached approximately 10 million, the largest Spanish-speaking city in the world. 1/3 of Peru's national population now lives in its metropolitan area. How does a sound nobody planned become the music of a generation? The same way a city of 600,000 becomes 10 million. One family carrying everything they know, building where there is no ground, until what they built is everywhere.